Have you ever felt it but couldn't quite explain it? There's something different about people who grew up in the 1990s. Not louder. Not quieter. Just steadier. When they speak, they don't rush. When they listen, they truly listen. They don't scramble to fill every silence. They don't perform attention. They're simply present. At first, it's easy to label it as personality. Maybe they're introverted. Maybe they're laid back. Maybe they're just not consumed by online culture. Have you ever felt it but couldn't quite explain it? But that explanation misses something deeper. This isn't about temperament. It's about timing. People who grew up in the 1990s didn't just grow up in a different decade. They grew up during a psychological shift humanity had never experienced before. Their childhood began before constant stimulation became normal. Before notifications. Before algorithms. Before identity became something you curate and broadcast. They learned how to be with themselves before they learned how to present themselves, and that shapes a nervous system in lasting ways. The environment you develop in teaches your brain what normal feels like. And their world moved slower. If you wanted to talk to someone, you called their house. If you wanted to see them, you made plans in advance. If you missed something, it was simply gone. Moments weren't archived. Embarrassment faded. Joy existed fully because it wasn't being documented. Presence wasn't a mindfulness technique. It was required. Then everything accelerated. The internet expanded. Cell phones became constant companions. Social media turned visibility into value. Speed became the expectation. And the shift happened while their identities were still forming. They were old enough to remember what came before. Young enough to be reshaped by what came after. That creates a unique psychological position. They became a bridge generation. And bridges don't fully belong to either side. They connect two worlds while standing in the tension between them. For kids in the 1990s, boredom wasn't an emergency. It was part of life. There was no endless scroll waiting in your pocket, no algorithm rescuing you the moment stimulation dropped. When boredom appeared, it stayed. So you created. You imagined. You daydreamed. You built entire worlds in your mind. You learned how to entertain yourself without external input. And without realizing it, your nervous system learned something powerful. It learned to regulate without distraction. It learned that discomfort rises, peaks, and fades. That skill becomes resilience later in life. The ability to wait. To tolerate uncertainty. To sit in silence without feeling threatened by it. That isn't nostalgia. It's conditioning. Waiting was built into daily life. You waited for songs to play on the radio. You saved money for weeks to buy a single CD. You waited for movies to be available at the video store. You waited for friends to call back. Desire didn't equal instant fulfillment. Time existed between wanting and receiving. Psychologically, that builds trust. Trust that what you want can exist without being immediately satisfied. Trust that anticipation won't destroy desire, it deepens it. Today, delay often feels like rejection. But for those shaped earlier, waiting meant process. That's why many people who grew up in the 1990s approach life differently. They don't demand instant results. They tolerate the middle phase where progress feels slow. They allow relationships to develop gradually. They understand that some things ripen. Silence is another misunderstood trait. From the outside, it can look like distance. A pause before responding. A comfort with conversational gaps. But this isn't emotional absence. It's regulation. They learned silence before they learned constant stimulation. You could sit in the same room without speaking and still feel connected. Silence wasn't awkward. It wasn't suspicious. It wasn't something that needed fixing. So their nervous system learned steadiness without noise. They are not anti-technology. They are bilingual. They move comfortably through digital spaces. They understand platforms, tone, timing, and visibility. But they also remember depth. They remember privacy as a default. They remember when being unreachable was normal. Living between those two realities creates tension. They understand convenience. But they remember cost. They value progress. But they remember what was traded for it. Adaptability became their strength. But adaptability has a hidden price. When you grow up constantly recalibrating, you become skilled at handling things on your own. You minimize your needs. You regulate quietly. You rarely announce when something feels heavy. From the outside, you look calm. Self-sufficient. Unbothered. Inside, there can be fatigue. Because bridges carry weight. And they rarely get to rest. Many people who grew up in the 1990s feel older than their age. Not because they matured too quickly. But because they witnessed a world disappear. They remember life before constant exposure. Before fragmented attention. Before identity was tied to visibility. Watching an entire system dissolve while you're still forming your own leaves an imprint. It creates maturity without bitterness. Awareness without cynicism. A quiet emotional gravity. This isn't about saying one generation is better. It's about timing. They aren't slower. The world simply sped up. They aren't distant. They learned regulation before stimulation became constant. What you're sensing isn't detachment. It's steadiness. It's a nervous system that learned to be with itself before it learned to broadcast itself. If this feels familiar, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not behind. You're not out of place. You carry a rhythm shaped in a slower environment. And even in a world that keeps accelerating, that rhythm still matters. It shows up in your patience. Your depth. Your ability to sit with silence. Your refusal to perform for validation. And if you didn't grow up this way, understanding it builds empathy. Because what looks like distance is often balance. What looks like slowness is often steadiness. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts below. What was it like growing up in the 1990s? Subscribe for more conversations about the quieter psychological patterns that shape how we think, connect, and move through the world. And thank you for being here.